narrowly avoided being sent to prison for 10 to 20 years for several drug crimes and instead paid minimum fines due to some quick thinking and taking a huge risk. Late to the party, but when I was in high school and the few years after, my primary source of income was selling pot. One day I was just hanging out at home with the GF. We went to the Circle K a few houses down and got some beer. The clerk, who I knew pretty well at this point, asked if he knew where I could get a dub sack. I said sure and that I'd be back soon. I go home and forget about it. An hour or two later I'm like, oh shit, remember, weigh it out and go back. He had already given me the money, very important detail for later, so I waited until he had no customers. He came out and we went around the icebox, just smoking and chatting. I handed him the bag. Now, there was no one around. Empty lot except for this beat-up Volvo facing the record store next door. If I had been paying better attention, I may have noticed this Volvo had completely tinted windows, which seemed odd to do on a beat-up Volvo. Two men get out of the car and approach us. One tall skinny guy wearing 100% denim and another guy who looks like Dog the Bounty Hunter in a beige sweater. They approach us and ask how we're doing. Me and clerk look at each other like, you know these guys? Then all of a sudden, the flash badges and yell, EPD. You're under arrest, and cuff us, separate us, and search us. Beige Dog goes through my texts, finds a couple dubious ones, a few crumpled up 20s, starts trying to get me to admit to doing a lot of business today. Blah blah. Then they surprise me by walking me and my GF back to my porch, saying they've seen me come and go quite a bit and just want to make sure you don't have a pound of heroin in there, and they'll just charge me with a misdemeanor. Otherwise, it will be jail and a felony. So here we are, on my front porch, me saying there's no way I will let them in my house and to call my lawyer over and over. At one point, my roommate walks out, says hi, gets in his car and leaves. At this point, Dog explains that if I don't let him search the house, he's going to park a few squad cars on the lawn, extract everyone from the house and wait on a warrant, and they will charge everyone in the house with every little thing they find in any room. I now know this is not legal. Then, I was just scared. My roommate that had just left was a total nerd with a great job. Straight edge, rarely drank and never smoked or anything at all. I was terrified of him losing his job. Unfortunately for me, I had just had an opportunity to get a quap of mushrooms at a steal of a deal. My area was super dried up on mushrooms at the time, so I asked around and basically had all my deals set before I got it. This timing was perfect, because just 30 feet away on the coffee table of my bedroom was 1/4 of a lb of mushrooms, neatly weighted out into ounces, and 1/8. Top that with all the pot in there. It wasn't looking pretty. So, I proposed that I let one of them in to search just my bedroom and be done with it. I knew once I let them in they could do whatever, but I was out of options. Beige Dog agrees. Canadian Tux stays with my GF, who looks terrified like, "What the fuck are you doing?" at me, and Dog the Sweater Hunter enters with me. I lead him upstairs, and walk right past my door, which thank God was closed, and into the straight edge guy's room. Dog completely turns it over, takes out drawers, turns the mattress over, the whole shebang. As he does this, I quietly turn off the computer monitor with a background of my roommate and his GF glaring on it. Guy finds nothing, sticks with his agreement, and walks me and my shit-eating grin back downstairs. My GF, probably assuming I'm going to prison for many years, is looking like she's about to die, but I'm just grinning. Guy still fucking charged me with a felony. Then they leave. Long story short, paid a lot for a great addy who was friends with the prosecutor. Since no money was seen to be exchanged, the charge was knocked down to deliverance of marijuana. The prosecutor recommended the minimum sentence. I paid an $121 fine, did 80 hours of community center at a local music venue, saw a ton of shows for free, and retired from selling. God, I hope someone reads this. This is a long story from the early 1980s that has Kentucky justice in it. My family lived just outside of Cincinnati on the Kentucky side of the Ohio River. My father's older brother lived here as well and was a father to 4 daughters. One of his daughters at the age of 18 or so was dating a guy who was a little older than her, who convinced her to move down south with him. My uncle approved and his daughter headed south with her boyfriend into a Kentucky holler that his extended family lived in. Time passed and my uncle hadn't heard from his daughter in a while, and he started to grow concerned. My cousin called my uncle in distress from a payphone at a grocery store, saying she was being mistreated by her boyfriend's family and being held hostage and worked like a slave. Before my uncle could learn more, the phone was cut off. At this point in the story, it's important to know my uncle was an avid hunter and gun collector. He explained to his wife and other daughters the situation. He packed up his Oldsmobile Delta 88 with his favorite guns and headed down to the holler his daughter's boyfriend was from. He was going down in hillbilly country, where there were no street names, just dirt roads and family farms. By the time he finally found their farmhouse, it was night. The boyfriend's family was on the porch shooting shotguns off into the air, fully expecting to scare my uncle away. My uncle stopped his car 50 yards from the house and popped the trunk. He methodically lined up his rifles on the hood of the car facing the house, tooling up like Arnold in Commando on the beach. My uncle was an extremely large man, who was well known for having an explosive temper. Completely unfazed, he shouted up to the hillbillies, "If my daughter doesn't come down in 5 minutes, I'm going to come up there and kill every man, woman, and child I see." The boyfriend and his brothers ran back inside the house, and not even 1 minute later my cousin came running out of the house with her single suitcase. Same uncle another time, was driving on a bridge that spanned some small river. The bridge was old and only had enough room for one car to traverse at a time. He came to a standoff with 3 hillbillies in a pickup truck who were honking and yelling at him to back up. My uncle, ever stubborn, refused and instead got out of his car, figuring he'd show them how big he was and they'd change their tune. One of the hillbillies shouted to my uncle, "You don't scare us, there are 3 of us." And my uncle, like a psychopath, shouted back, "Do all 3 of you know how to swim?" To which they relented and backed up their truck to let my uncle pass. When I was about 10, my family moved from the city to this small, like a few hundred residents town in northern Australia. We started going to school, and after a few weeks we made friends with the other kids. They kept telling us about this club in town called the Nature Rangers. The way they described it, it sounded like some off-brand Boy Scouts with camping and hiking and all that. They also said they gathered at their ranger hall on Fridays to have movie nights with popcorn and hot dogs. Me and my younger sister begged our parents to let us join, so on Friday night we got dropped off at the hall. So we lined to go into the hall, and all the kids are joking and laughing. They open the doors and we all start walking in, and the whole mood shifted. All the kids immediately shut up. As I walked in, I looked up, and on the walls was all this signs. "Sinners must burn," "The devil is coming for you," "Christ is your only savior," stuff like that. The one that stood out was this huge mural of Australia engulfed in flames, with only our northern town spared. It was an eye-opener for us city kids. What happened next got weirder. It was something you see in movies about fanticles in the deep south of America. We sang these weird folk songs, listened to fire and brimstone sermons. We had to give our faith to the Lord Jesus. The one song that stuck out years later went, "He's under my feet, he's under my feet, Satan is under my feet." The song was accompanied with a dance we had to learn. Me and my sister were looking at each other like, when is this going to be over? Then after all of that we were ushered outside. The boys and girls were separated. The girls were to stay at the hall, but the boys were off to go with this creepy-looking old guy, who they called Brother Joseph. He was getting all the boys to get into his white van to take them for a drive. That's when I knew that enough was enough. I snuck out of the line and silently got my sister and said we are going. By this time it was late at night, so we snuck into the dark. Our home was on the other side of town, so we slowly made our way home, creeping from yard to yard. Every time we saw car lights we hid in trees or bushes. When we got about half a km from home, I told my sister to leg it, and we sprinted the whole way home, burst into our house and proceeded to tell our parents the whole thing. They always say they had never seen us so scared. It's a story we laugh about at the time, but at the time it was dodgy as fuck. We lived in that town for another 3 months, and the other kids never mentioned Nature Rangers to us ever again. This story needs some context to understand the full surrealism I felt. I come from a fairly sheltered life from a very small, mostly apostolic Christian town. I'm not apostolic. Well, in about 8th grade my parents divorced and my mom moved to a slightly bigger city, and I started to make friends that weren't as PG as I was used to. During my first house party the summer of 8th grade, met this guy named Punk Rock Rob. This is an aside, but he had a habit of slinging his dick out, which to this day dude had the biggest schlong I've ever seen. It was cartoonishly big. Fast forward a couple months and me and one of my friends were going to sneak over to a girl's house and stay the night. Well, her parents caught us sneaking in and of course kicked us out. So we're out in the city in winter with nowhere to go. We couldn't call our parents because we did the whole trope of telling them we were staying at the other's house. It was about that time that we remembered Punk Rock Rob, who was quite a bit older, worked at the Jimmy John's down the road, so we go there and are going to ask for a ride home. Well, he invites us to go to an even bigger city to his friend's house to party. Remember, I'm from a small town, so the idea of going to the city was exciting. He proceeds to drive us into the ghetto to his friend's house, where I proceed to have the craziest night of my life. Apparently, unbeknownst to us kids, Punk Rock Rob belongs to a gang of white supremacists. This immediately made me uncomfortable, but I didn't have a choice but to go with it because Punk Rock Rob was our ride. We were stuck there. They proceed to make us drink more than I have ever drunk before or since that day. They are in the middle of the hood yell singing that song from American History X that the guy in the ice cream truck is singing. In the middle of the hood. I got chased around the hood with a taser that night. One of them stole my shoes. We pass out in this random house. When we wake up, Punk Rock Rob is gone. So we are in this neo-Nazi stranger's house, no way home. I was supposed to be home in a few hours to go with my family to get my picture with Santa. That should give you an idea of how sheltered I was versus what I just experienced. I thought I was going to have to call my very Christian mom to come pick us up from a neo-Nazi gang hang out in the middle of the hood. Luckily, one of our other friends who could drive agreed to come pick us up and that situation was avoided, but that was one of the most life-changing nights of my life in terms of how I perceived the world. Most terrible, surreal night of my life. I did not have a car when I was at uni, which made going out with my friends a bit bothersome. I would constantly stumble home half drunk in the middle of the night or early morning, wait for the first train to leave, and so on. One day I was visiting friends and the only way back home that late must have been between 1 and 2 in the morning, was a train which followed some god-forsaken country route. My stop lay next to a small wood and a castle. Think 13th century Central European castle. I knew the way because I have played there a lot when I was a kid. You have to follow a trail through some fields, past the stables where horses are kept, through a wooded patch that dips into a slope, past the woods around the castle, then along a narrow road between 2 fields, past an abandoned gatekeeper's house that looks like a set straight out of a horror movie, until you reach a bridge where you need to pass underneath to rejoin civilization. There are no lights anywhere. I was still a bit drunk and I considered just waiting for the next bus, but that would have been hours. It was summer, the weather was nice, and I thought, well, I know this path by heart. Easy peasy. So I started walking. Everything was fine until I reached the slope. As soon as the terrain dipped, there was zero light. On my left were the woods, completely black. On my right, a hill covered in underbrush completely blocked the moon. I couldn't even see my own feet. There I was, shuffling forward like a complete idiot, only one stray branch away from breaking my ankle. It took me forever to reach the end of the slope. Now, you can imagine what it felt like to stumble in utter darkness in the woods at night. Every sound made me think I was about to get murdered at any moment. It was actually the thought of a former teacher of mine that kept me from panicking. He said that the forest is pretty much the safest place to be at night, because what kind of inept would-be killer would wait for a victim in the middle of nowhere? We'd be more likely to get mugged in a dark alley near the city center. So I tried to be rational. Eventually, the moon reappeared and I was at least able to see a bit better. I was just walking toward the abandoned house, congratulating myself on my bravery, when, I shit you not, someone jumps out of the woods to my right into my path. It was so quick, I wasn't even able to scream. A fucking jogger in full gear. In the middle of the night, in the woods, without light. He just ran along the road ahead of me as if he had night vision or something. Anyway, I got home unmurdered, swore I'd never do something like that again, and did the same exact thing minus the jogger a week later. I honestly wonder how I made it past 30. Was served lunch sometime during a flight. While eating, noticed that the woman next to me is slowing down in her movements, slower cutting, slower chewing, etc. Suddenly she stops completely in her movements, fork and knife in hands, half-cut food on her plate, face bowed forward above her plate and nothing else. Touched her on the shoulder, pushed a little bit, asked her if everything was okay, no reaction. Couldn't really tell if she was still alive. Was it the air conditioning or her breath? No idea. Didn't want to panic and frighten everyone else. You know, dead person. Made eye contact with a stewardess, point towards next to me. Couple minutes later, 5 stewardesses including co-pilot form a barrier around our seats and like in a movie tried to get a reaction, aka, "Don't you die on me." Woman wakes up, looks up and says just this one sentence, "I took really strong sleeping pills." And goes back to sleep in the same Tyrannosaurus posture. As if this has happened before, and she had anticipated this conversation, as if she knew that her mind would only be awakened long enough for one sentence. So for the entire remaining 6 to 7 hour flight, there is this lady next to me, mimicking a Tyrannosaurus, her hands still grabbing the now removed fork and knife, drooling on the table. And everyone passing by giving me this questioning look. Best flight ever. The reason I went to Mexico in the first place was for my friend's birthday. She lives there and begged me to come stay with her for it. Well, it's Mexico, free accommodations, sure I'll go. So my husband calls me when I'm on my way to tell me he has COVID. Great, just what I need at this point. I had a layover in LA and started feeling ill. By the time I get to Mexico, I'm really wondering if I have it too. When we pull up to her condo, she's outside waiting. Her driver let her know we were almost back, so she came to hug me. I told her to stay away from me, that there was a chance I had COVID since my husband does. This part is important. She says she doesn't care. COVID is just a flu, and if I have it, it just means I get to stay with her longer, and she'd love that. Then she came in for a hug. That night I took a COVID test, and sure enough I had it, but I was assured after 5 days I'd no longer spread it to others and could go on with my vacation. I spent the next few days with a high temp and throwing up, but that didn't stop her from coming and sitting with me, etc. We were there for 13 days when it was time to get the COVID test done so we could head home again. Well, wouldn't you know it, mine came back positive still, while my travel partner's was negative. I wasn't allowed to go home. I was a bit upset, but that's okay, I still had a place to stay, or so I thought. My friend comes into my room wearing a mask and tells me I have to get out that day. I was there the whole time and she knew and called it the flu, tells me she'd love to have me stay longer. Now all of a sudden she wants me out that day. So my travel partner and I are both pissed at her and start trying to find me somewhere to stay, and since you have to disclose that you have COVID everywhere, was saying no to me. She didn't care if I ended up on the streets, she wanted me out now. My husband ended up having to call the emergency line for Canadian Consul about my situation, and they said I have to get an Airbnb, and also let us know the test could stay positive for up to 90 days after having COVID. I was able to find an Airbnb which turned out to be a hotel, lol. Packed up my stuff and was ready to leave the same time my travel partner was leaving for her plane back home. As my stuff is being loaded into my Uber to leave, my friend had the nerve to and hug me and tell me to call her. Hug me. Yup, she's real worried, isn't she? A couple days later I took another COVID test and it was negative. My friend, well, she wrote me to tell me she has COVID. I haven't spoken to her since. That's what took me into my near kidnapping. But that's just that trip. I've had a screwed up life. I worked security, was a volunteer firefighter, and XXX, then did the normal things like working in bars, etc. So I have lots of stories, I just don't know where to post them. I saved a man's life, and I never saw him again. 10 years later, this is still the craziest thing that has ever happened to me. In high school, I worked as a lifeguard at a country club for a few summers to earn some money. It was a cushy gig. It was for country club members only, so a large part of the job was learning people's names and interacting with them. Mostly just saying, "Good morning, Mr. Jarity," and listening to some generic mumbling about millennials. Well, over the 4th of July weekend, there were more people at the pool than usual. Each member could sign in one guest, and there was a middle-aged man jumping off the diving boards who I hadn't seen before. He was over 6 feet, at least 230 pounds, and was doing gainers off the low dive into the pool to make big splashes to impress his country club member friends. Well, one particular jump he got a running start and slipped off the board at the very end. His momentum was already leaning backwards to do the jump, and his body came off the board a few feet and his head rotated backwards and smacked right into the diving board. I can still hear that cracking sound in my mind. I'm sitting 8 feet off the ground in the lifeguard chair at the diving well watching this all go down, and I am praying that I don't have to do anything, even though I knew shit was about to go down. I didn't see any blood, which was a good sign, but as I watched his body sink down I counted 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 3,000. No movement. Fuck. I blew 3 short tweets on the whistle, the cadence to signal to the other guards that I would need the neckboard, and jumped in with my buoy, making as little of an impact as possible in the water. My lifeguard training took over as I dove down 8 to 9 feet to grab this dude. He was out, just making no movement whatsoever. Like I said, he was a big dude, but he wasn't as heavy in the water as I grabbed him and kicked us both up to the surface. I hoisted him onto the buoy and swam over to the edge, where by now the other guards had stuck the board down into the water. I lined up his limp body with the board as we all worked together to strap him into the board. The other guards pivoted the boards out of the water while I climbed out. I took a half-second look around to a half-dozen shocked faces, and it became clear to me that this was my show. Great. Still obeying my adrenaline-fueled rote memory of my training, I shouted for someone to call an ambulance as I made a decision. See, I thought he probably had a neck injury. The board he was strapped into is designed to not move his head, so he doesn't further injure his neck or back. But he wasn't visibly breathing, so I had to save his life at whatever cost it took. Or at least that's what my 16-year-old brain decided. So I started chest compressions. What they don't tell you about chest compressions is that you are breaking shit. You can feel bones and cartilage cracking under your palms. It feels horrible. I still haven't been able to shake that feeling. 1 round of 30, and then I did 2 breaths into his mouth. His head was already tilted back a bit from being in the board, so I didn't have to move his neck. After 2 breaths, I went back to chest compressions, and after 5 or 6 a little water leaked out of his mouth. He coughed a few times, and the other guards picked up the board and whisked him away so fast I didn't even know what happened. I rolled over onto the concrete, a tinnitus-like ringing in my head, my heart racing, just sitting there taking it in. I went into some trance as my teenage body struggled to deal with what just happened. Start to finish, it probably only took about 6 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime of stress and nausea had built up in my body. I was walked over to the guard shack, dried off, and walked up to the country club's nicer member buildings. The manager, who was a friend's dad and had gotten me the job, sat down with me as we talked about what happened. I gave him the basic details, signed some documents, and was sent home for the day. Like I said, I was in some kind of trance and was just operating on autopilot. I'm not sure how much sense I was making at the time, and it took me several hours to process what just happened. I came back for my shift a few days later, and I was told by another lifeguard that the guy was okay. I was thanked profusely by the member who brought him as a guest, but I never saw that guy again. This was still the craziest thing that has ever happened. I'm glad my instincts took over and I remembered my training. I might not have done everything exactly right, but I tried my best, and at the end of the day he lived through it. I hope that guy's doing okay. There was a kid I knew in primary school. I guess I'd call him a friend of mine, but honestly he was kinda insane, and depending on who you asked, I'm sure some of the teachers would have told you he was bullying me. I got into quite a lot of trouble with him. Well, actually, technically it was mostly him who was getting into trouble, but I ended up in the principal's office so many times having to explain the crazy shit he and I used to get up to. On the one hand, he had a crazy vivid imagination. He'd spend lunchtime running around the school grounds pretending to be in the thick of a battle in WW2 against the Germans, getting into epic firefights, etc. But he would get so into it, it was contagious, and I couldn't help but join in. He'd lead me into his imaginary fray, shouting, "Move, move, move. Grenade. Get down, private." Then suddenly at a moment's notice he'd drop down to the ground and start crawling commando style through some shrubs with the most intense look on his face. And he had this crazy ability to construct very impressive little bases, basically huts, tents in the forest, mostly out of twigs, dead leaves and other stuff he'd just find laying on the ground. Try as I might, I could never build them as well as him. Hanging out with him was always an adventure, because when he got into something he was so into it, and I couldn't help but just join in and have a good time. On the other hand, he also wore steel cap boots to school, would repeatedly remind me that he was wearing steel cap boots, and would kick me in the shins with them to demonstrate. Pretty sure I came home with bruises on my legs multiple times. Pulled a box cutter on me one day, on school grounds. Would have random outbursts of extremely aggressive behavior, such as pushing me up against a wall, red-faced and furious and looking like he was about to lay into me, unprovoked. Despite his sudden and frequent mood swings, he was actually a fun kid to hang out with a lot of the time. I'd hang out with him after school, and honestly I think his mum was happy to see that he'd made a friend, because he tended to push other kids away with his behavior. The lunchtime war roleplay was always a blast, and it was great fun building stuff out of sticks in the bush, just because he got so into everything he did and it was contagious. Joining in was always a blast. I ended up in the principal's office so often to resolve disputes between us. The principal would often ask why I continued to be friends with the guy. Honestly, my friendship with this kid gave me a little bit of an insight into how abusive relationships might form, and how people can end up feeling trapped in them and keep coming back despite their better judgment. He moved to another state after 6th grade and I never saw him again. He did send me one letter about a month after moving though. Apparently he wrote it at his school athletics carnival, told me how he missed hanging out with me, and was gushing about how much fun he was having competing in the events. He wrote that he had just come third in the 100 meters race and was currently coming second in the 200 meters race, WTF. I wrote back to him, but he never replied after that.
Witnessed a car do a front flip into a river while we were tubing down it. This happened to me about 4 years ago and it's still really weird to think about. So it was my first semester in college and my friends that were also going to the same school I was, and I moved up a few days prior to the first day so we could do that whole first weekend party thing. We had come from Colorado and were going to Montana State. So the very first day we decided to go float the Madison River because all the local people told us it was really fun to do and drink beer and what have you. We had some leftover vodka from the night before and some pot as well. By leftover I mean close to 2 bottles between around 8 of us. There were 4 of us all from the same town that I went to high school with and another group of friends we met the night before. We finally make it to the river with water bottles full of booze and a couple of joints. Everyone but the drivers of our cars had already gotten into these substances in the car, so we were ready. We get into the river in our tubes we had bought from a gas station and started to float, smoke, and drink. Now there was a dirt road about 10 feet or so above the river on the left side as we floated down. We weren't even 100 yards from where we got in when a car came flying down the road, swerved and did what looked like a front flip into the river and landed right side up another 50 yards from us. We were all in shock because we are thinking we just witnessed a crazy accident, but sure enough a skinny-looking woman in sweatpants and a sports bra gets out and walks up the bank completely fine. Now of course we asked if she was okay and she mumbled that she was totally okay and just started walking back down the road. We really couldn't do much from there because we didn't have any phones and we were also drinking underage and smoking pot, so we figured fuck it, she seemed fine. So we just kept going down the river having fun. Ended up getting very drunk and had to go out to dinner with my parents after that. It is a memory I will always have.